What's up, Hobby Maniacs? Rob Bear here today with a fantastic blast from the past. This is the Warhammer 40k second edition starter box. It came out in 1993. A lot of you might not even been in the hobby or perhaps born then, but let me tell you what, this was a really exciting time for the hobby even back then, because this box basically represented the first time you could basically just kind of pick everything up and get it all together all in one place instead of buying a rule book and buying a bunch of miniatures. And now, you know, everybody talks shit about the pricing and things like that about miniatures these days, you know, $30 for a clan pack. But to be quite honest, back in the early 80s, you know, $8 for a blister pack was actually pretty expensive. I mean, I was just a kid. It was hard for me to get money, but I remember, you know, the play was real. I wasn't like flush with miniatures everywhere, you know, because basically I just didn't have that kind of money. I was younger, and it was a whole thing. And this box set here, actually, a friend of mine and I both got this box set, and we actually used his most of the time. So a lot of the stuff in here is kind of unpunched and everything, but I've kind of used the miniatures throughout the years because, you know, well, you've seen one injection molded miniature from the 90s. You've kind of seen them all. They're all that static, like stand in one pose kind of type deal. But it's unfortunate. But back then, I mean, that was a big deal. You know what I mean? Like, that was huge. So it's kind of like, oh man, there's all sorts of different like ways of looking at it. And you know, you see all the stuff that comes out today. They're designing things with computers. You know, and back then it was a little bit more rudimentary, and you can definitely see it in the designs. So anywho, this was the Warhammer 40k second edition starter set, and it came from what I guess they call it the spiky period or the red period, because all of the artwork and everything was all red. It was red everywhere. Everything was red. I don't know what was going on. Brian Ansel was in charge of the studio, and it was just, you know, there was just red shit everywhere, and it was cool. All the packaging was red, and you know, the blisters and things, and then they kind of transitioned to a more neutral kind of tone after a while. But this is the contents of the box set here, and you can kind of see, you know, those static poses I was talking about right there. And you know, they're great for back then, but for nowadays you're like, ew, those are gross. And they even came with this little graphic right here is a cardboard cutout for your Orc Dreadnought, which you can kind of see right there. And it came with some runes you could punch out, all sorts of different cards and things. There was a Warhammer 40k War Gear book, the rule book, the Codex Imperialis, which was basically where to get all of your Codex book rules if you didn't buy the individual codexes themselves, which all weren't out when this box set came out, kind of like what happened with third edition. All of the third edition codexes weren't out, so that was the way you could play your army. And then there was a quick start guide, kind of some rules things about, like, you know, general stats and the turn sequence and things like that. And then all of this was all the tokens and things, the blast templates, the dice, all the chits and things that you needed to play. Wargear was a big thing back then. You could actually buy psychic grenades and you know, all sorts of vortex things, virus bombs, rag grenades. It was all something back then, and you could buy it all. And then there was like some mission cards, and I forget what these are right here, but we will get into all of that. So right here you can kind of see the whole kind of rundown. You get 80 plastic miniatures, all the codex books and things we were talking about right there. Basic painting guide. I don't even know if I still have that in here. The full color card ruins, which you had to put together yourselves. And then, you know, reference cards, war gear cards, play sheets, quick reference, yada yada yada. So let's dive right in. Now, I did an article about this way back in the day, where I just basically took some pictures. But it's nice to finally be able to get in here and to do a video of it, because this is such an iconic thing from the past. And you know, all the stuff, I wouldn't say all of it, but I would say a vast majority of the mechanics in 7th edition 40k today come from the old 2nd edition. You got Overwatch, which they brought back, this Psychic phase, which they brought back. Well, I guess they technically brought that back in 6th or whatever, but just so many things that we saw back in the day. And remember, this game was a skirmish kind of game. It was kind of the transition from a skirmish to a full tabletop battle kind of thing. But with the complexity of the rules, it wasn't really feasible to, you know, I mean, the psychic phase itself sometimes would take an hour. So like, it was kind of something you would do in an afternoon, not necessarily in a 2 to 3 hour kind of tournament span. So here's some of the miniatures that we were talking about. You got, you got the Gretchen and things, and they're okay. They're not, they're not. You see these now, and you're like, just what the heck? But back then, this was a great way to get a whole bunch of miniatures, super quick. And then there's the Orc Boys, which are right here. Let me just put this in my lap, and then we can just kind of grab it all out, and we'll zoom in. And we're zooming, and whoop, wrong way. And we're zooming, and we're zooming. So here's the orc spear here, and you can tell it's all that traditional 90s kind of style of orc. It's not exactly the big muscular kind of Hulk brute that we see today. It was this kind of romanticized kind of Gorka Morka kind of spiky period kind of thing, like they call it. And it was cool for what it was. It was really neat to see. And the people were literally buying this half of the box set. And remember, there wasn't eBay or nothing back then. You would go into a store and you buy a starter, and somebody would be like, "Yo, what the heck? Yo, let me get that." This little guy right here was one of my first attempts at painting way back in the day with the plastic guys. This is a I want to say it was a Black Templar, but there wasn't really Black Templars back then, so I'm not sure what he was. I was just kind of messing around because black was easy to paint, or so I thought. And then here is the War Gear book. Well, here's the War Gear book. Let's zoom back out a little bit and show you this bad boy right here. Now, the War Gear, like I said, you're going to notice a lot of things in here, and let's just take a look. Because a lot of these books, I could spend a hot minute on just going through it all. But I don't necessarily want to do that. Written by Rick Priestley and Andy Chambers to basically 40K pimps, gaming pimps of the tabletop industry even now, so to speak. It's just amazing what these guys have really put out and done in their day. So you got the rundown of all the hand-to-hand weapons, basic weapons, pistols, heavy weapons, support weapons, battle cannons, the tarantulas, the thud guns, stuff that we're only seeing come back now from Forge World was actual miniature kits you could buy back in the day. All your different kind of grenades, and this was always super fun, was things you could throw, and they just did all sorts of crazy stuff. Your armor and shields. I mean, there's basically war gear in here for taking bows and arrows and crossbows. In the Beastia, in the war gear, or excuse me, the Codex book section, there's rules for fielding beastmen as part of chaos. So it's just like one of those things where you're just like, holy crap. This was really a hodgepodge leading from Rogue Trader era to 2nd edition, and then it kind of got more standardized in 3rd edition there. Special issue grenades, war gear, targeters, teleport homers, and then it basically explains how it all works, las cannons, the weapon profile, support weapons. You had a tow, limber, and unlimber. Like I said, it was stuff that today wouldn't necessarily work because of the time restraints. You had the Harlequins back then. You'll even see Gene Stealer rules in these things here. It's super crazy. Stub gun, web pistols. There's all sorts of such cool old, so much flair to these guys. Just like back in the day, there was so much cool things to see. Thud guns, there was a crazy scatter. You had grenade launchers on dreadnoughts that when you fired the grenade launcher, you could say, hey, this is smoke, and then it would scatter like that as well. It was very, very intricate. Everything had a purpose. Everything was very interesting to see kind of how it worked. And like I said, this was an afternoon affair. This wasn't a, hey, let me just get a quick 2-3 hour game in. People hobbied on their armies. People, basically came to the store ready to go. They didn't come with Gundam Wing proxies, that were unpainted. Not that I would have a problem with the Gundam Wing proxy if it was painted up and on the right size base and about the same size and cost as whatever model they were trying to proxy it as. But as it is right now, there's a lot of people that abuse the system. I think we can all agree, and that just it irritates me a little bit sometimes. But it's one man's hobby is another man's trash, and another man's hobby, is his happiness, whereas, that isn't the way I would hobby. So I don't want to presume to tell anybody, hey, you're hobbying wrong. That's the last thing I'm ever going to say. But, I think we all know who we're talking about here, you know what I mean? So here's the contents to the actual rulebook itself. And you'll probably notice that there is a lot of stuff that's very familiar as well to you that had buildings back in the day. That had, they called it Pisonics, but it was basically Psychers. Remember, this developed from an RPG kind of style setting. You had shooting, all the things for shooting. And I'm going to show you in the War Gear book, actually, it's at the weapons book. They used to have this. The Cyclone Missile Launcher was really interesting. Yep, here it is. So the Cyclone Missile Launcher was really interesting because you could literally fire all of your missiles. You would take Terminators and you would say, okay, well, I'm going to fire 12 missiles. Wait, what? Yeah, I'm just going to fire all 12 of my missiles on my Terminator right now, this turn. So you would have a squad of 5 of these things shooting 12 missiles each. And it was just like super crazy. I mean, it was 72-inch range. The D10 did damage back then. Armor pen was D10 plus D6 plus 8. Now, the normal damage chart was 2D6. So this is pretty ridiculous when you think about it. D10 plus D6 plus D8. That's pretty nuts. And then you had modifiers plus 1 to hit. So I forget exactly how you hit. I think you had to roll the dice and you had to compare it to what you needed or what their ballistic skill was. It wasn't quite the based on 7 thing. That was developed in 3rd edition. But, you know, you had armor saves that were basically a Terminator's armor save was a 3+ on 2d6. Like, do the math on that one, right? I want those days back again. And then if a squad of Terminators got hit, there was a catastrophic launch chart where they might shoot all their missiles off accidentally regardless. So a lot of randomness, you know, to the game back then. It was really interesting to see how it all kind of... you know, it would just take forever, basically. Like, I literally remember timing a psychic phase once, and it was like 4 hours, and I was just like, I feel my life slowly slipping away. I cannot remember a time when I wasn't playing Warhams, because it was pretty nuts back then. But it was a good time. It was definitely a good time for the hobby, and like I said, everybody really went above and beyond to make their shit look good and you know, play well with others for the most part. But, you know, it's never been a balanced game. It's always been rock, paper, scissors. I mean, you had armies that would win before the game even started with, like, preliminary bombardments for the guard, you know, so to speak. So it was vexing, but it was also very rewarding, too, I feel like. So you got all your shooting stuff here, and it was basically how it all worked: scatters, throwing grenades, which is also another thing that was recently back introduced, you know, into the lineup for the main game here. And then in vehicles, you had data faxes, and there was templates for moving them, and you know, boarding and leaving. Sometimes they could ram and they could do crazy things, and you know, shooting was a whole nother thing. The vortex, you know, vortexes run around the board doing crazy stuff. They pretty much work the same way they do now, but there was a propensity for more craziness to happen, and there was actually some expansions you could buy where things would pop out of the vortexes, kind of like you know, Drago style, and that was really interesting. So you kind of probably noticed this card template thing here. This is kind of like what we've seen for Apocalypse, you know, in the current era here. But back then they were much smaller, but that's basically how you did it for like the thud guns and things like that. Here's a lineup of some of the dice. Remember, based on an RPG, it was very interesting that you would see all that. You had misfire dice. You had critical hit dice, the sustained fire dice, which is another way of basically rolling for things breaking. So if you try to do something crazy, like you just want to keep shooting your assault cannon, okay, well you can, but guess what? You might jam it, and you have to roll the sustained fire dice there. So lots of different types of dice. Like I said, the game has been a lot more simplified since then. But going back, it's definitely reminiscent of, you know, you don't remember the good games you have. You always remember the ones that were like crazy shit happened. Like, for instance, I was overwatching with a squad of Marines, and I was like, okay, yo, this squad's overwatching. And I had a heavy weapon las cannon. And some Eldar Swooping Hawk did their jump pack move, which is similar to kind of how it is today. But he basically jumped in the path linearly, not like up and down into the sky. So it was kind of like a teleport kind of leap thing. And it just jumped right in front of my last cannon, and I was like, yo, that's the only thing that can reach it. I'm going to shoot you. And you know, I was like, I can only kill one guy, but whatever, I just wanted to do it. Sure enough, I shot one of them Swooping Hawks out of the sky, and, you know, that's literally one of the very few things I remember about, you know, the whole, like, 2nd edition games. It's always the random stuff that happens, or the more challenging things, or more rewarding things that you remember, and you don't remember, like, you know, just the great games that you had over and over and over. You just kind of remember the random stuff there. So strategy rating, that went away in 4th edition, but it's definitely part of 2nd. You can kind of see here. So they just kind of go through all of the mission cards and things, and we'll show you some of those. There was different missions and things, and going over unit types. You know, it's this whole thing is set up just like the current rule book for the most part. I mean, you can see here, you've got shooting, you know, it goes into hand-to-hand combat, breaking and rallying, psychology, hero characters, vehicles, buildings, you know, all that sort of thing. So it's very similar in a lot of ways, I feel like, to today, but, you know, still a little bit more complex in and of itself there. So Lots of diagrams, examples. You know, remember, this is all like tabletop publishing. We didn't have computers back then, you know, so they're like probably sketched this out and then just like scanned it in or something. You know, back when people actually had scanners and not cell phones, I guess. And then here's the whole heavy metal section where, you know, they didn't have any standardized terrain. They made all that from scratch. You know, all of this stuff is pewter miniatures. You know, like I said, a lot of times you see the Carnifex, and the Carnifex was like the biggest creature they had ever made up to this point, like right there. Like that and the Bloodthirster were like the boogeymen of this era. You know, you were like, oh my god, he's got a Bloodthirster. There he is right there. The Tyrannid Screamer Killer. Ugh, so many bad memories of that guy, wrecking my face. But that's, you know, that's the way it is. There's Ragnar. He hasn't changed much in all those years, huh? You can see some of these models definitely haven't changed. And then it gets in, there's some scratch built stuff there. Remember, there was Armor Cast that Forge World hadn't actually set up shop quite yet. Tony Cottrell was only doing conversions and things in the White Dwarf. So here's some templates, or basically some understanding of how vehicles worked. You know, you had your data faxes, is what they call them, which basically turned into data sheets these days. And, you know, you would, back in second edition, or excuse me, first edition, you would have to roll for locations and things like that. It wasn't quite that way here, because that was like slow and monotonous, but, you know, it was, things could happen depending on what you did, and you could always have a chart to like consult and things like that, damage effect table on destroyed buildings as well. So a lot of this is eerily similar to what we're seeing today. And there's a quick reference guide, which is also a cutout in here as well. So I think there was a lot of redundancy in these books. And then Codex Imperialis, like I said, was the collective codex, I guess, so to speak, for all of the armies and races. And there was actually an insert that came with this book too, that, or I think one of the expansions that I still have, that was very similar to this stuff. But when this came out, that basically replaced that. And then, you know, you would buy the individual second edition codexes as they came out over the years. I think Sisters was the last one to come out, if I remember correctly. So you've got stuff like that, like you could play Psychers as a separate faction themselves, the Ministorum, you know, all of your preachers and things like that, your Sisters of Battle, the Adeptus Mechanicus, Assassins in general, Orcs, Eldar, the Squats, of course, Chaos, Tyrannid, Space Marines, Imperial Guard, aka the Astra Militarum. You know, they didn't have, obviously, Tau, and Necrons were a skirmish army that came out in White Dwarf later in the 90s. So you're not going to see any of that stuff in here, you know? So this was, you know, it's kind of like seeing the video games come out these days when they don't have all the factions. You're like, yo, I want to play Necrons. Well, it's kind of, there's no Necrons. Just pretend there's no Necrons. You know what I mean? This was hardcore 40k. We didn't have that much to, you know, to choose from. And once you get into the, I mean, like I said, I could spend, you know, 30 minutes going over these books and all the differences, going over the second edition books, but, you know, it's just, it's so cool to see, you know, you had Psychers as their own models, you know, you had priests, confessors, you know, these are all models that we still see today on the tabletop in pewter fashion. They haven't changed in nearly 20 years. Then we got servitors, electro priests. Hey, what are those guys from, right? Tech priest. Very cool to see some of the origins of these things. Then you got the assassins, and there's actually cool Gene Stealer stuff in here too. Let's find those. Towards the back, I believe. Oh, here's all the squat stuff. So the squats obviously have a rich and varied history as well before they got squatted, so to speak, and completely done away with. So there's all the squat rules. Then it gets into chaos. Let's find the Tyrannid stuff. Here's the Tyrannid stuff. Okay, so here's the cult stuff here. So you got Gene Stealers, you got your Gene Stealer hybrids, your Gene Stealer Patriarch, and your Gene Stealer Magus. Because remember, these were the original pewter models back then. You could still play with them. Like, they had rules for them. They did, you know, they were part of the game. They kind of went away in third edition, and we just kind of never saw them again. Then you got some chaos stuff here, and chaos wasn't exactly the classical chaos we think of, like the third edition chaos, where everybody has such fond memories of. I feel like this chaos was a very hodgepodge mix of almost everything. Like, you had beastmen, you had cultists, hounds, you know, chaos space marines. It was kind of like a almost like a Lost in a Dam kind of army, not exactly the conventional stuff that you think of today. And then here's some of the scratch built terrain that was constructed. Mike McVeigh actually did a lot of this terrain back in the day. You know, he's gone on to do McVeigh Studios, did a lot with Privateer Press. Here's some of the card Gothic ruins. Now, of course, we were probably spoiled by some of the Gothic ruins and things that came in the current 3rd edition, and I think even 4th edition sets of the rules. This was kind of like your explosions, and you can definitely tell here this is bigger than a 5-inch template. This is probably, this is your conventional 2-inch template, so this is a 3-inch, excuse me, this is a 1.5. This is your 2-inch. That's weird. 1.5. So that is a 3-inch template. So this is a 4-inch diameter template. This is a 6-inch diameter template. Okay, I'm getting it. And then you have the vehicle turning template, which is even weirder. Remember, like when you try to wheel your models, you know, these days, your tanks and things, if you got enemy models around them, you can't just wheel because then you'll be within, you know, a 1/2 inch. But back then, this was a thing, you know, everything took longer. And then there's those templates that go together, and they basically give you the readout of what you know, models go to them. Some more chits and things. The flamer template, this is way bigger than the normal flamer template. This is more on par with the flamer template. This was your hand flamer template. And let's see, this is jammed for the sustained fire dice. Flamed, you would still be on fire back in the day. Fast speed, run, because you could also run back in the day. A new mechanic they just brought back. Defeated and out of, what is this? Out of control. Okay, well, that's really interesting. And let's see what else we got in here. This is the cap, or the base, to, let's see if we can find him. We'll put that aside. I'll save that for a, oh, there he is. So included in this box was a Orc Dreadnought right there. And this was his little stand that you put him on. Hey guys, I got my proxy right here. Oh my gosh. Could you imagine somebody playing with something that today? They would get like literally ridiculed. And then we've got some, what are these, war gear cards? Yeah, war gear cards. You used to buy war gear separately, which you still do today, but, you know, it was a little bit more effective, I guess. They would have, you know, caveats on here, like discard after use, so you had your vortex grenades, all of your fields, and, you know, different war gear, like Web of Skulls, some stuff for Eldar. Everybody could pretty much take everybody else's stuff, which is really weird and hard to keep track of. Here's the quick reference guide. It's a nice little card thing with some more little chits there for keeping track of your stuff. This is how to keep track of the games, like turn 2 victory points, turn 1 through 4, and then your victory points table and more wounds and things like that. And then these are mission cards, because kind of like how you roll it up today, you would just grab a mission card and kind of go from there. And then you've got the how to play. This is the quick start guide, right? So this was basically hand-to-hand fighting against the Gretchen. Well, I guess the Gretchen's dead. Break tests and things like that. So you would always start with this first. But I mean, look at that tabletop publishing right there. That was not done on a computer. You can definitely tell, right? And then we get into damage tables. This is basically where I think this is for dreadnoughts. Yep, this is for dreadnoughts right here. So when something bad would happen to a dreadnought, this would happen. And then when something bad would happen to a vehicle, they basically were streamlining the D20 location thing for a vehicle into a D6 damage location thing for a vehicle, which we saw completely go away with 3rd edition. It was just, you know, the conventional, you know, shaken, stunned, which was actually the vehicle damage chart, or excuse me, the building damage chart. That they converted over to be part of that. So I got some more mission cards in here. And hey, check this out. Vortex grenades. What? Yep, cardstock vortex grenade templates and a quick reference guide for all of the war gear right there. Very cool stuff. Digging even deeper, we're getting to some of the data faxes, which we would call them data sheets today. And I'm trying to keep them on their little card, but that's probably not going to happen. So here's the data faxes for some of the stuff that we know and love today. Like you can see the Mark 1 Predator there, Mark 1 Land Raider, Mark 1 Rhino, Space Marine Dreadnought. They actually didn't have a model for the Space Marine Dreadnought at the time they put this out. That was a pewter release later on. They had the Chaos one though, but they didn't have the Space Marine one. And then there's the damage tables of things that would happen. Like I said, they tried streamlining damage charts from a D20 over to a D6. And then, you know, we basically know the whole chart today, like I was saying, shaken, stunned, and all that razzmatazz. And then it comes into just some advertisements in here, which is really interesting. You know, hey, you want to play Epic 40K? Yeah, sure do. Armies clash in the 41st millennium. Ooh, look at all those tanks. There's some history. Pretty neat to see. Look at all that sweet terrain. Oh man, those were the days right there, folks. And last but not least, the world of hobby games. I imagine a lot of these are going to be going out this fall in the new starter sets for the big box stores. And this was basically like their little catalog of all the stuff, you know, that comes in the starter set. Like basically, hey, buy the starter set for fantasy, and then of course a bunch of different languages there. And then on the back was your 40K thing. Because remember, 40K was a little bit newer. Oh, here's some store locator from 1993-ish, I would imagine. And you can tell there wasn't quite as many stores as there is today. That is actually England right there. In the US, there was two whole stores that carried Games Workshop, and Fairfax City Mall, and it's Springfield, Virginia. There's actually still a GW store in Springfield, Virginia, and there is not in Fairfax, I don't believe. Well, there's a piece of history for you, if I'd say so. So, as you can tell, being a hobbyist and being on, I actually think the first, I actually think one of the first stores to carry Games Workshop in the U.S. was Showcase Comics in Pennsylvania, actually. So, I don't know why he wasn't listed on there, but because I know he had been carrying them since the 80s. But, you know, Games Workshop, they always, you know, they had the restrictions on what they wanted stores to do and carry and things like that. So if you wanted to play ball and be in their good graces and get their advertisements, hey, there you go. But that, you know, all that said, that could definitely be a just a locator for the actual Games Workshop stores themselves and not independent retailers, because by 1993 there was a ton of independent retailers. So I can definitely tell you that much right there, because that's where I started buying my stuff from, and that was as early as 1988. So I'm definitely certain there was more than two. I can guarantee you that in the US. So that was probably just GW stores there, now that I think about it. So I hope you enjoyed my little walk down memory lane there, man. That was really exciting. I literally have not opened this box probably in 4 years, and before that probably a good 10 or more years. As you can tell, I think I stole some miniatures out of there for a conversion in the late 90s, actually. So really exciting times. I hope you enjoyed taking a peek at the second edition starter box for Warhammer 40K.
Deleted scenes, bonus content, and all the interviews and post-game wrap-up videos can be located in the Hall of Veterans on thelongwar.net. Visit thelongwar.net today and try a week completely free with no strings attached. That's not all. Thelongwar.net is also your hobby resource for exclusive early access with an ad-free experience to all your favorite videos. Members of the Hall of Veterans gain early exclusive access to multiple hobby videos.